My talk today will explore four very different hill forts along the Tay, from the estuary to the threshold of the Highlands. In presenting the highlights of their excavations, I'll discuss their construction and their function in the context of the estuarine and riverine landscapes in which they're set. Finally, I'll consider the Tay's much deeper past and the idea of the river as a conduit since early prehistory. We'll begin down in the estuary at Abernethy, Castle Low Abernethy, work our way upstream to the twin forts on Moncreiffe Hill, and finally Kingseat Dunkeld up on the Highland threshold. All the excavations were delivered through community archaeology between 2014 and 2021, led by Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust and working with AOC Archaeology. The area's got a very long history of fort research. The 18th and 19th century excavations at Dunsinnan Hills in the Sidlaws, inspired by association with Shakespeare's Macbeth. You can see on the left and the scars of those early trenches still very clearly visible. And in 1900, David Christensen published the Forts and Camps of Perth, Forfar and Kincardine, which included consideration of site morphology. And morphology remains a useful starting place today, but as we'll see, it can be misleading. Our sites include, apologies, I don't have a pointer, but top left we have one of the smallest sites, Castle Low Abernethy. Directly below that, the small multi-vallet fort at Moncreiffe. And then, and its neighbour, more done down in the very bottom, one of the largest in the area. Hill fort studies have recently been significantly enhanced through the Atlas of Hill Forts of Britain and Ireland, which is a really impressive and valuable online resource. Oops. Castle Low Abernethy has a special place in Scottish fort studies due to the Victorian excavations there. In the 1890s, inspired by Edwin Weston Bell's excavations at nearby Castle Low Forgandenny, two local residents uncovered the walls at Abernethy, and Christensen was astonished by their progress and completed the excavations in 1898 with really iconic photography and measured drawings and notes on the finds by Joseph Anderson. Abernethy is really small. It measures only 43 by 16 metres internally and encloses about 0.06 hectares. The criteria for inclusion in the Hill Forts Atlas, a minimum area of 0.2 hectares, would strictly preclude the site's inclusion, but an exception was made due to the site's key role in Scottish fort studies. Despite this diminutive size, the site remarkably has 6-metre thick walls, and that was really the focus of our excavations in 2017. They assessed the nature of the walls, some of which had been exposed for over 100 years. Importantly, we noted the inclusion of large quantities of old red sandstone, a feature which hadn't been previously noted in the earlier excavations. This stone was transported at some effort to the hilltop from the valley floor below, probably due to its workability and possibly appearance. And at Abernethy village, where the burn runs down into the village, a lot of that bedrock is actually exposed there. The records from the 1890s highlighted the timber lacing within the walls. And this, along with the high status finds recovered, prompted Gordon Child to identify their construction as the Murus Gallicus described by Caesar, and the type site for his Abernethy complex. Both the walls were of this composite construction, and in his account, Caesar noted that the stone protects it from fire and the wood from the battering ram. As we'll see, there are other examples in the immediate area and across Scotland that are northern outliers of this much wider European tradition. The excavations also allowed us to review the Victorian finds and confirm the very high status of some of these, such as a copper alloy brooch and a copper alloy spiral finger ring, but also including things like this shield bangle in the top right and other domestic items. Significantly, an iron pin was recognised after conservation as being a rare linchpin from a wheeled vehicle, possibly a chariot. Evidence of prehistoric wheeled vehicles is rare in Scotland, but of course we have the Blair Drummond Late Bronze Age, Iron Age tripartite disc wheel, of a type which is known across Northern Europe. Other artifacts that recovered from the fort cistern in the 1890s included a wooden bowl and a large quantity of animal bone, which actually gave us a very useful date of circa 370 to 170 BC. Other secured dates weren't available, largely because we were re-excavating previously opened areas. So really, in conclusion, Abernethy is one of a series of oblong forts known primarily in northeast Scotland. These are unusual in that they do not have entrances at ground level, and these were probably at some height in the wall facade, but really limiting access. With excellent visibility across Lower Strathearn and the estuary, it also controlled an important terrestrial route inland. With high status finds and a display of powerful architecture, its status as a key power centre of the later Iron Age remains unaltered, but our work has provided some new insight into its nature. So moving west along the estuary, Moncreiffe Hill controls the confluence of the rivers Tay and Erne and hosts our next two sites, Moncreiffe and Moordun. This 19th century view from Newborough shows how the hill dominates the upper estuary. Moncreiffe was the smaller of the two forts on the hill and was much damaged due to woodland cover and had been questioned as to whether it was actually a fort existed there. But our excavations not only confirmed its presence, but identified its multivallate nature with 4 lines of ramparts and 2 entrances identified. The site was the earliest on Moncreiffe Hill and probably occupied in 2 phases, the earlier possibly unenclosed, and the later enclosed sequence from the 6th to the 3rd centuries BC. While there's no certainty that the ramparts were all in use simultaneously, they are all broadly contemporary. However, in addition to the Iron Age dates and finds recovered, we also uncovered an important assemblage of chipped stone, including a leaf-shaped arrowhead, which indicates Mesolithic, late Mesolithic, early Neolithic activity on the hilltop. Moving now to its neighbour, Moordun, it is one of the larger fort complexes in the area and consists of a series of enclosed spaces with a large northern annex, which is really to the bottom of the slide. And Richard Feacham first mooted this as a nuclear fort in the 1950s. Nuclear forts are best known through sites such as Dunkeld and more locally Dundurn and Clatchard Craig, and they consist of a summit enclosure with a series of descending outworks, often on a craggy hill, and they were initially envisaged as being constructed in one phase in the early medieval period. However, Dunkeld revealed a sequence of enclosure dating back to the 4th century BC, and Dundurn an early medieval sequence from the 6th to 9th centuries. In summary, some early medieval nuclear forts were built on the footprint of an Iron Age predecessor, while others were clearly de novo constructions. And it's clear to see why Feacham proposed Moordun as a nuclear example. The morphology is quite similar, with an apparent central summit citadel and a series of lower outworks. And Alcock actually endorsed this reading, influenced by the early historic references to the Battle of Moncreiffe in AD 728 or 9. However, Moordun is really big when compared to a lot of the nuclear forts of the early medieval. And so our excavations aim to really date the various enclosures in the whole complex. That was our primary objective. With the evaluation trenches required to achieve even a small scale excavation sample meant really quite large trenches. We also explored a large mound within the complex, which is just to the top of the trench. We can see here this open space at the top of the hill. This proved to be a monumental roundhouse dating to circa 325 to 250 BC and was destroyed by fire. With similarities to the Black Spout Iron Age structure in Pitlochry. Its 5-metre thick walls also included old red sandstone and enclosed a roofable interior of around 12 to 13 metres in diameter. Of the larger enclosures, you can see in the top, well, possibly not, but in the top right, the larger enclosures, there were stone-faced earth ramparts. Ramparts B and C were much depleted. The larger Fort B may have enclosed the monumental roundhouse, while the later Fort C was actually later and respected its line. However, by far the largest structure on the hill was the enclosing wall of the oval summit fort, which measured 50 metres by 40 metres internally, enclosing around 0.15 hectares. And this is this massive wall here. You can see someone walking along the side of the trench, just giving an idea of the scale of this. A massive timber-laced wall, similar to that at Abernethy. It was almost 6 metres wide and survived a height of almost 3 metres. Again, it included significant amounts of old red sandstone brought up from the valley floor, and may have been a variant of the Murus Gallicus, which had exposed longitudinal beams in its facades, the longarines, as they're called on the continent. These are rarer, but Iron Age examples are known on the continent, and early medieval examples in Scotland, such as at Burghead. And that's the lower of the two reconstructions there. In conclusion, rather than a nuclear fort, the excavations confirmed a sequence of structures including a Broch-like building, 2 larger forts, and an Abernethy-like oval fort with massive timber-laced walls. It appears that all of this occurred over a relatively short window over the 4th to 2nd centuries BC, following on from occupation at the smaller multivallate fort to the west. Importantly, this dating was confirmed by the finds recovered. The site produced, as expected, large numbers of domestic artifacts, most of which could date from the Iron Age through to the early medieval period. But it also included an important assemblage of Iron Age shale bracelets, like the one from Abernethy. But these included repaired examples and unfinished material that indicated manufacture on site. And most spectacularly, amongst the copper alloy objects was this decorated bird-headed pin, a masterpiece of early Celtic art dating to the 3rd century BC. Like the high-status copper alloy objects from Abernethy, it attests to a level of status and social connection, that's really quite significant. And in the case of this artifact, really to a degree rarely observed in Scotland. However, it's also significant that there was no diagnostically early medieval artifacts recovered. As we'll see, a suite of artifact types is a recurring feature of these early medieval nuclear forts. So in terms of the dating of it, the fact that we didn't find any early medieval sites confirmed the Iron Age dates. In summary, Moncreiffe Hill outlines a development of forts from the small multivallate site through to larger univallate sites and a massive oval timber-laced fort in the latest style. This architecture and the small finds confirm a community of well-connected, including a well-connected and powerful elite. Moving upstream to our final site at King's Seat, Dunkeld. It's a site with another really strong location, this time controlling an important bend to the Tay at the threshold to the Highlands. And you can see it just above the row of white buildings above the river. That small mound, small hill to the north, above those is the King's Seat. And you can see the river continuing up Strath Tay to the north. It was also mooted as an early medieval site by Alcock in the 1980s, who later suggested that it might include a pre-Roman or pre-Roman Iron Age element. In other words, he suggested it could be one of these Iron Age forts that was later occupied and developed in the early medieval period. As a result, our main questions, as it more done, was really to establish a dating sequence for these 3 very different enclosures. In the centre, this oval upper enclosure on the top terrace. To the west of that, a multivallate western enclosure on a middle terrace. And then to the east, a lower enclosure, quite an unusual structure on very uneven ground on the lower terrace. Little really survived of the enclosing walls of the central and western enclosures, which might suggest that they'd been robbed or dismantled. But there was very good survival of some of the internal features, such as this large hearth in the central enclosure and a number of smaller hearths in the western enclosures. And clearly these indicate a number of functions, but also the presence of buildings within these forts. However, it's elements of the small finds assemblage that really confirmed early medieval activity of the same nature as evidence that Dunnad, Dundurn, Clatchard Craig and East Lomond. And this includes moulds and crucibles for precious metal working in addition to iron working. And while that certainly involves copper, there's no direct evidence of silver or gold, but silver can't be discounted as a possibility. It also includes eWare pottery from the 6th to 7th centuries AD, imported from the continent as containers for exotic goods, and bowls and jugs associated with feasting and imported wines, and also glass beads of the Germanic tradition of a similar kind of date, and a fragment of a decorated tall conical Anglo-Saxon drinking beaker dated slightly earlier to the 5th to 6th centuries AD. That's the yellowish vessel in the top right, and the eWare is in the top left. The radiocarbon dates recovered were from all three enclosures, and they suggest a single relatively coherent phase of fort construction spanning the 5th to 7th centuries AD. So we managed to get dates from each of the enclosures, and while we can't preclude Iron Age activity, both the finds and dates suggest an early medieval de novo construction for King's Seat. However, as at Moncreiffe, the excavations also recovered an assemblage of chipped stone confirming late Mesolithic occupation with domestic activities such as hide working and tool curation. Another significant development from the project was the recognition on LiDAR data of a much larger southern enclosure, which more than doubles the overall footprint of the entire complex. So on the left, you can see these arrows pointing out on the LiDAR data, fairly ephemeral, but this large kind of really subcircular structure, which to the west is defined by a bank and to the south by natural cliffs, perhaps enhanced in places. And really looking at this plan, you can draw parallels with East Lomond Fort, which has a large enclosure to the south also. And I think these large enclosures really raise questions about the nuclear forts and how we've perceived them in the past, and really questions about the nature of Pictish settlement on the mainland at this time, which to date, for example, in northeast Perthshire has been seen as very dispersed, whereas we're looking at something that's a bit more like potentially like towns here. Some reconstructions of, you can see this view looking north with the central citadel with a large building in the top where the hearth was, and then sloping down to the west, to the left, the western enclosure with its multivalate lines, and some more metal working, potentially glass working in these areas. And then to the bottom right, the lower eastern enclosure on this very rocky enclosed space, where there was evidence of metal working, and the area might have been quite well suited to that. So really it's kind of confirming this idea of a hierarchy from precious metals in the top and, feasting activities, etc., down to more prosaic activities in the lower levels. And this view looking to the south, really with the same idea, but this time giving an indication of the size of the southern enclosure to the right. At this point, we haven't really populated this with much information because to date we've only confirmed the presence of the bank, which would really be on that visible stretch, but we have had no excavations of the interior as yet. In conclusion, it's likely that the King's Seat formed a capital or seat of one of the lesser kings of southern Pictland between the 6th to 7th centuries AD, at a time when emerging kingdoms were playing a really significant role in Scottish early history. It was really ideally placed to connect with other power centres of similar date, both to the west, north, and to the southeast, and these are reflected in the finds. And as we can see, sites like Dundurn and Dunnad to the west, East Lomond and Clatchard Craig to the southeast. And of course, that route north into northern Pictland would also be an essential conduit. While it was possibly relatively short-lived, its legacy endured as a power centre, endured as power passed to Dunkeld, which was to remain, an important ecclesiastical centre over much of the Middle Ages. So really, in conclusion, we've got a site where there is production of high-status objects being created, and some of that might be down to local materials that are available in Highland Perthshire, notably around copper, etc. So finally, turning to watercraft and the idea of the Tay as a conduit. Of the known logboats of the area, 3 have been securely dated, 1 to the late Bronze Age and the other 2 being early medieval. The first of these was the Errol II vessel, a large 10-metre boat dated to the 6th century AD. The other, near Dalguise, to the north of King's Seat, was dated to the 7th century AD and was about half the size of the Errol vessel, so more suited to riverine rather than estuarine use. And the proximity of these crafts to Clatchard Craig and King's Seat might be indicators of, the increased economic vibrancy around these production centres. Large logboats such as the late Bronze Age Carpow example were suited to transporting people and cargo, using the tidal reach of rivers to access far inland, but really they would creep around the estuary and were for riverine use. They would cross the estuary in good weather, but they're certainly not going out to sea. However, larger plankstone boats shown on the left here are known from the Middle Bronze Age. They're kind of expanded logboats, and these are, they're known from the Humber estuary, but also from Dover. They were suitable to hugging the coast and to crossing the channel, has been argued at Dover. And, I'd suggest that they were very probably active in the Tay also. And of course, by the early medieval period, we've got clinker-built vessels, and the model on the right shows a Viking nar, a type of vessel used to transport cargo. And it's a kind of indicator of the sorts of boats that would be around in the early medieval period and transporting perhaps your e-wares and these other, your various other things over longer distances. So we have to remember that, the coast and the Tay, as occurred until the 19th century, was really the main connector to the interior of Perthshire. And going back to Clatchard Craig, which is now totally removed, but is this this hill on the left of this reconstruction. This is of the Bronze Age boat, but the setting could easily be a view from the early medieval period, and you wonder whether with its Clatchard Craig, with its distinctive profile and its estuarine setting, could have been a node for the kind of offshore polities that Martin Carver has suggested as developing over the 5th and 6th centuries. And it makes you consider whether Castle Law and Moor Dun might have had a similar function 1,000 years earlier, attracting contract and trade from out with the estuary. And finally, turning to the Tay's much deeper past, the excavations at Moncreiffe Hill and at Dunkeld have produced important new evidence of late Mesolithic, early Neolithic hilltop activity along the river. So the slightly darker find spots were previously known Mesolithic artifacts or sites. And this has changed significantly over the last 20 years. About 20 years ago, there was simply a suggested number of flint artifacts known from Canoe Hill, none of which turned out to be Mesolithic. But over the last 20 years, we've got an emerging picture of the Mesolithic and most significantly from Freeland's Farm, which is a site to the south of Moncreiffe Hill. And apologies, I'm just realising that the colour differentiation is not huge there. But really, it seems that these hilltops were being used as a Mesolithic for camps, or camping places, or for hunting grounds, overlooking the lower grounds, the wetter grounds, or on the river and around the estuaries. And it's also a reminder here about the importance of boats again. The earliest known boats, log boats from Holland and France, also date to the Mesolithic, and they're amongst the earliest boats known in the world. And we should recall the recovery of the now lost Friarton logboat from Perth Harbour. It was recovered from the brickworks at Perth Harbour, which is, in the 1870s, Geekie recorded its recovery on peats laid down, suggested or laid down around 7000 BP, which, if correct, and it's it's not a certainty, but it could suggest a boat of the later 6th millennium BC.